Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I just wanted to share a few books that I've recently read. I remember doing something to this effect in previous months. I think I called it Recent Reads, and I basically just give small reviews on books that I've read, letting you guys know what I thought. Hopefully it is something that is helpful for anybody looking for book recommendations on various topics and things that I am interested in as well. So if this gives you a nice recommendation or helps you to make an informed purchase, all the better. And I'm just going to share these books that I have read recently, all of which I do like, so I will preface it in that way. Of course, there may be some criticisms of the books, but I would say that overall I would recommend all of these books, which is why I'm featuring them. So I have 4 books, none of which are directly correlated to tarot, which is interesting. That's something that I wasn't really expecting when I went back and picked out a few books that I'd recently read. And so I have 1 that is about astrology, and I have 3 that I would say are more or less about spiritually related topics. So without further ado, I guess I'll get into the astrology book first because it kind of stands alone. And so we have Astrology, Psychology, and the 4 Elements, an energy approach to astrology and its use in the counseling arts by Stephen Arroyo. Now, anybody who is interested in astrology or reads astrology books may know Stephen Arroyo. I know he's written a bunch of books on astrology, many of which are also on my list, but this is the first book that I've read by him. And I actually really enjoyed this book, so I have another book of his, and I think I'm going to bump it up in my list of books to read just because this was such a game changer for me in the way that I look at astrology and go about, I guess, looking at a natal chart, so reading astrologically. So getting into this book a little bit more, the key defining factor in this is really his approach and the way that he sees astrology. So he reconciles things like looking at astrology in a more predictive and spiritual sense and looking at it in a purely analytical and psychological sense into something that feels more holistic. He is very much about seeing astrology and using astrology in a holistic way, and finding that he believes that others can use it in terms of psychology and counseling, that we can integrate it into society as a lens through which we choose to see each other and to better understand ourselves, our society, and interactions. So a key thing here, of course, are the elements. So he has actually a really unique system of looking at the planets, at the houses, at the signs in an elemental way. Of course, the zodiac signs are inherently elementally connected, just in that we have three fire, 3 water, 3 earth, 3 air signs. But the way that he categorized houses, actually, for those who know astrology, was what was really unique. And let me go through just the basic system that he has. And I think that this is something that I'd love to incorporate going forward. Gave me a really nice new perspective. So he broke down the houses into 3 different types. So we have angular houses, which connote action. We have succedent houses, which connote the idea of security, and we have cadent houses, which connote the idea of learning. And then we take those 3 different distinct types of houses, and then we add an element to it. So the element of water is exemplified through the words soul and emotion. We have earth with the word material, we have fire pertaining to identity, and we have air pertaining to social and intellectual. So we would say combine the 3 types of houses with the 3 elements, getting this sort of key phrase that makes up any given house. So he breaks the houses down by element. And so, for example, we have the 4th house being an action-oriented house, and then it would be action on the emotional and soul level, and that being a really key contributing factor about what makes up the 4th house and how we're choosing to look at it. So he has that for all of the houses, which is a system that I hadn't seen anywhere else. I believe it's unique to him, and he devised it. So that really added something to my astrological studies. He goes into ways of assessing oneself and your relationships through astrology in a way that is more comprehensive. So whereas astrology can feel really detached, like we're looking at things that are hard and fast and have trouble applying them to our daily life, he has a way of really incorporating and letting us know that there's a lot of wiggle room, that nothing is so definitive, but that the concepts themselves are still very valuable and applicable. And so I really liked it for that aspect. He also quotes and brings in a lot of different authors and studies in this book, so there's a diversity in terms of voices being shared. He has other astrologers and their studies and quotes from them that he uses to base his own ideas around. He has psychologists. There's things from Carl Jung and other prominent psychologists throughout history, historians, philosophers, etc. So that was really cool to see in a book. So if you are interested in astrology, I highly recommend this. I don't recommend it as a beginner book because he does take into account that you know the basics on the signs, the houses, aspects, and all of that, and planets. So you do need to have some foundational knowledge, I think, to fully understand what he's speaking on, although I don't think you need to have a wide and long history in astrology to be able to read this. So maybe just read a book or two to get the general sense, and then you can hop into this and be just fine. While it's a thinner book, I wouldn't call it a quick read. It did take me longer than I expected to read a book of this size. It's a little bit heady. There are some denser concepts and things that you have to take your time with, and so I wouldn't call it a quick read, but it didn't take me too long. Highly recommend it if you're into astrology at all. This was a game changer for me, something that broadened my perspective on what astrology can be used for. Next, we have Encounters with Nature Spirits, Co-Creating with the Elemental Kingdom by R. Ogilvy Crombie. This is a recommendation from Katie Flowers. She mentioned it on her channel as a long-standing favorite of hers, and she actually gave a copy of this book away in a giveaway, and I remember seeing her speak on it, or hearing her speak on it on her channel, and knowing that this was a book that I immediately wanted, so I set about getting it, and it didn't disappoint. It was really amazing. I would say that this, of all the books that I have, is the most narrative-like. There's a storyline to it. You're reading what feels like a story. The rest feel a little bit more informative. So there's an element to this that's really playful. It feels a bit like you're reading a storybook, but in a little bit more of an adult sense. So it's not necessarily childlike in its storybook mannerisms or writing style. It's more mature. But you're also being informed, almost inadvertently, it feels like. So it's really a first-hand account from the author. This is nonfiction, and his, I would say, experiences in interacting with nature spirits and the god Pan. The god Pan being this energy that he perceives as Pan, and he makes that very clear, but that there are these subtle, elemental, and natural spirits that exist all around us that we don't necessarily get to interact with or see on a normal day-to-day basis, and that they are there, and this is really just his experience in life. It starts in his later years. There is a preface in the beginning, I would say, that gives us a short biography on his earlier life, just mostly as it pertains to the contents of this book. And we also get a few other writers in here who speak on the author, and they are friends of his, people who knew him, so they will speak on who he was, on their experiences with him, but for the most part it is through the voice of R. Ogilvy Crombie. And I will say that there's this sort of interconnected aspect with the next book that I have, which is Conversations with the She by David Spangler. R. Ogilvy Crombie knew David Spangler, and they had similar belief systems and ideologies, and they were a part of, I believe, what is an association to some effect called Findhorn, and it's a location. There may be multiple locations now. I didn't do too much research on that, but it's a really funny coincidence that the two are connected, and they reference each other, and there is a section in this book written by David Spangler as he knew R. Ogilvy Crombie, and so he speaks on him there, and I believe that David Spangler references him in this book too, so really funny. I did not know that they were connected at all when I read them that way, but I highly recommend this. This felt like a really relaxing, quaint story. It's almost something that I would want to grab a cup of tea and sit out in a garden and read and just feel relaxed. There is this emphasis of protecting and connecting to nature, of protecting our environment, of being kind to each other as fellow human beings, being kind to our earth, and trying to understand things better in this sort of expanded form of consciousness, if that makes sense. So this is really about mindfulness and being aware. There's a really beautiful lesson to be learned through what feels like almost childlike in a mature sense story being told. So if you are nostalgic at all for the idea of storybooks but looking for one that is a little bit more mature, this I think fills that cup pretty well. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend to everyone and anyone. Next, we'll get into that Conversations with the She by David Spangler. This is pretty different from the last one. I would say it's not really a storybook quality. There's no storybook quality to it. This is primarily transcriptions of David Spangler's interactions with the she. The she being, I would say, these beings. The word is from, I think, Irish mythology, and it pertains to not necessarily fairies, as they make that clear distinction here, but they're tied in with the idea of fairies in popular culture, although they are a separate being, and a being that he connects with through in a similar way to subtle energies or forces beyond us. So they're not necessarily physical, and he's not going out and touching them. This is nonfiction, but he's almost connecting with them energetically, channeling in a way. And so most of the book is transcriptions of his words and his voice, and then what he receives back from a member of the she, or the one that he interacts with primarily, which I believe is it, I just read another book on the she and now I can't remember. Marielle. So the member that he primarily speaks to is Marielle. It's not quite a transcription, just in that he makes it clear that the dialogue is nonverbal, so it's through feelings and thoughts and images. And so he's the one that's kind of put words to that interaction. So he's not physically speaking, and he's not literally hearing words back, but he's telling us basically what those feelings and thoughts and images meant. And so that's what we get in this book. It's really his path and progression interacting with the she for the purposes of helping humanity. So he teaches classes, and he references classes that he's taught in this. So it's about trying to be a more aware human being, to help improve our society, to be more interconnected, to expand our consciousness and our awareness, to be a little bit more spiritual and mindful in life. So there is this overarching theme of interconnectedness, of mindfulness, of really being in the here and now, and feeling and seeing and understanding. So if you're at all interested in ideas of consciousness and interconnectedness and being and all of that, then these two will be good for you. This one's a little bit more like a story. This one being more, there is a story-like aspect to it, but it feels just like a dialogue between two individuals. So if that appeals to you, I recommend it. I would say that they were both relatively easy reads that you could probably get through in a day or two. They were actually really relaxing to read as well. So if you're looking for something to unwind, have a cup of tea, sit outside, these are those kind of books. And then finally we have Aleister Crowley's The Book of Law. This is a very thin book. You can read this, I think, in one sitting. I did. There's not too many pages, and the pages are not numbered, so I don't have an exact number for you. But I read it in one sitting. I also wouldn't say that this is a quick read, or at least for the length of it. It took longer to read than expected, which I guess I should have expected, this being written by Aleister Crowley. And the way that he writes, the way that he speaks is not necessarily so straightforward. It's not necessarily in layman terms. There's a lot of figurative and metaphorical language, things that are harder to understand, that you have to sit with a bit. You have to read between the lines. You have to try to extract what he's getting at through his words, through the verbiage. So there's that. It's broken up into a few different sections. The first two sections, or the first two chapters, are written in that very metaphorical, figurative sense, where it's chock-a-block with metaphors. It's very spiritual. He's getting at some concepts that are, I would say, of importance, but that you really have to dig into the words and get at it yourself, read between the lines. The last section is actually written more in a more straightforward way, in layman terms. He's not speaking in as many metaphors, so that section was easier to read. It's actually titled Cocaine, and it was interesting. I think he's really getting at understanding who we are, of not getting lost in society, getting back to our core values of what it means to exist and be a human being, and how, I guess, the idea of society and capitalism and values have kind of been distorted and taken us away from what it means to be human. And he uses a lot of different metaphors or analogies in terms of drugs and substances to reference kind of the detachment that we've got, the detachment that's happened in terms of us feeling far removed from our humanity, or what it means to be human. And that was actually really interesting, and I was surprised at that section, and I really liked it. So I would recommend this, I think, also if you're interested in reading with the Thoth Tarot. If you're reading the Book of Thoth, Crowley references the Book of Law in quite a few sections and takes little excerpts and quotes. And so that's part of what made me curious about reading this and made me want to read this. So if you're at all interested in the Golden Dawn, in Kabbalah, in ceremonial magic, and all of those sorts of things, I think that this will be useful. It's also just a short, nice read that gets you thinking. So if you're looking for something a little bit dense and that's going to get you thinking on broader topics about society and spirituality, I would recommend this. And so that brings us to the end. Those are my recent reads in the last few weeks. I just thought I would share those, and hopefully something in there was of use, or maybe you felt called to read one of these books. Let me know if you have read any of these. I'd be curious to know your thoughts, and I'm sure anybody watching this would want to know as well in the comments, so let me know. And I hope this was helpful and entertaining. Like and subscribe if you thought that was the case. I hope you are all well, and until next time, bye everyone.